Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International. Time for Method NA versus Buff War Nerf Rogue. It's been a pretty anticipated matchup. Now that we've been able to see a lot of the large contenders in the series and throughout this tournament, we get to see our eyes on Method NA, a team that has been pushing, has been striving, and working as hard as possible to get that win in the tournament here, Sours, and they want to be able to take it home today.
But something also that'll be interesting is if Method NA wins the series, then it'll be all West teams still alive in the upper bracket and all East teams in the lower bracket. So I think that'll be very exciting to see at the end of the series.
I think we all kind of came into it knowing how dominant the West could be. We were also kind of trying to keep in mind how much teams could improve given, a month and a half time to study, prepare, practice. We haven't quite seen that yet, and Buff War Nerf Rogue kind of encapsulated our Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde vibe on this one's ironic.
Yeah, they were. I mean, we talked about these teams as well. We said Team D and Abracadabra were also this style of team. They're just one of those teams where they're either on point or they just die 30 times. We've seen this many times, especially in the King's Rest back in, I think it was Cup 2 when it happened. They're just one of those teams that can either look really amazing or look like they're one of the worst teams in the tournament.
Yeah, with a lot of travel on stress of being in the LAN environment on their mind, for a lot of players on Method NA side, this isn't anything new to them. We have the MDI veterans in JB, and the other side of the equation here, Nagura, as well as Lighty. But on the other side of the equation, we also have, Yoda coming in from Professional Heroes of the Storm. So a lot of experience for these guys and a lot of composure.
Yeah, I think they should definitely keep a cool head. Now, the one thing that I've really gathered from them when we talked to their whole team yesterday was that they really prepared for Method EU, right? They want to win this whole thing. And the problem they had when they talked about playing against or preparing strategies was that they felt comfortable with their strat, but if they want to beat Method EU, they have to do it even riskier pulls and even bigger pulls, which makes them uncomfortable, and they're not very happy if a pull doesn't work out 80% or more of the time. So maybe if they play some riskier strategies and have some deaths here and there, which totally can happen if you play this kind of risky style, then they can definitely lose against Buff War Nerf Rogue.
And at that point, the riskier they go, the more stress they're putting onto the healer. And healers in particular, Sours, have been so much in the spotlight for not only the threat of them dying, but also being able to survive through a lot of the damage, heal through a lot of the threats that are coming up. Raging Necrotic is going to be no different.
Oh yeah, Necrotic is a real bruiser on your tank. However, in Motherlode, where the tank doesn't really actually end up doing a lot of tanking, he's mostly doing a lot of running. Necrotic shouldn't affect them at all.
Yeah, at this point, it doesn't affect the mindset as Method NA as 89% of Twitch chat's favor as we go into Game 1 here on the Motherlode.
Yeah, so Motherlode is this one dungeon where we see DKs come out a lot. So we see the double DK for both Method NA and Buff War Nerf Rogue, just because there's so much trash to do in this dungeon, and we see DKs just doing so much AoE damage.
Yeah, and of course, the thing about it is the affixes kind of lend themselves to doing these mass AoE pulls. Neither Raging nor Necrotic are really those super dangerous affixes that are like, that kind of make you want to make that decision of, maybe we don't want to pull that many trash mobs. As long as you're kind of making sure you're getting this dangerous interrupts in that raging range, you're not in any danger here. And we see Method NA, both teams actually, NA and Buff War Nerf Rogue, coming out of the gate with this huge triple mechanized Peacekeeper pull.
Yeah, we see Method NA actually not using their Bloodlust, while Buff War Nerf Rogue did choose to use theirs. So Method NA either doing a bigger pull later on, or they choose to use their Bloodlust for something else, as JB drops very low from one of those charges from the Thugs. Now, the one problem here with Raging and the Thugs is that they also have a Raging effect themselves that they cast that can't always be interrupted, because the interrupts need to be used for other things that are more dangerous. So if a Thug has Raging by itself and then Raging from the affix, then a charge does so much damage.
Yeah, and like Sours mentioned here, pretty much they're not really tanking these mechanized Peacekeepers. They're kind of just running away from them. Four Peacekeepers with Charge Claw on them is kind of dangerous, not to mention the Necrotic. So that's why you kind of see Nerf just running around in circles instead of having everyone, cleave them down. Now, we do see actually Buff War Nerf Rogue is already on their first reaping wave. They're very far ahead in terms of trash percentage, so I'm not sure if this big AoE Necrotic pull was the right thing for Method NA to do, but, maybe we'll have to see going forward what they want to do here.
It could be the difference between Bloodlust and no Bloodlust, right? Maybe Method NA is going to catch up later when they actually choose to use theirs, but we've seen some teams actually waste the whole Bloodlust because they didn't want to use it at the start, and then they've been in a dungeon for 10 minutes and they still hadn't used it. So definitely want to see the Bloodlust as soon as possible by Method NA to not waste too much time and having a downtime. We actually see a death come in from Method NA as well. We saw the Battle Rest come out immediately on Shakib though.
Yeah, that was the thing too. It was the exact same thing as what happened in the courtyard on that Waycrest Manor. In the last series, the DK died before he had the chance to get any of his AoE cooldowns out. So instead of doing, 600k, 700k AoE damage, he does less than everyone else in his group, minus the healer, but that's to be expected. And then we see another death, Lighty going down as well. Fortunately, once the thug goes down, they'll be able to out-of-combat res him, but this is just kind of the nerves I don't want to see right at the start of the dungeon for Method NA. These guys have been there before, right? JB and Lighty have been there. They were at BlizzCon. They know what it's like to be on stage, so I don't want to see these mistakes out of these guys.
Yeah, they definitely have to play better and keep a cooler head if they want to be #1, which is their goal, right? If they want to win this whole tournament, they can't make those kind of mistakes. Even though they can still win this dungeon, of course, but just having a death here and there is not going to be good enough later on in this tournament. Buffalo and Nerf Rogue, on the other hand, they also had one death, but they are further ahead into the dungeon now. They're about to kill off this trash pack that they pulled here, and then they're going to be ahead in percentage compared to Method NA.
Yeah, we saw Ching on the side of Buffalo Nerf Rogue there, also dropping incredibly low, and also his Once Somebody's Bargain Trinket is on cooldown, so he won't be able to cheat death for another 6 minutes or so. But that's going to be the theme of the first half of this dungeon here. We're going to see tanks pulling a lot of things and then just running in circles, trying not to get hit by as much as possible. The only thing we really have to look out for are those mech jockeys. If any mech jockeys are alive and not in Peacekeepers, they tend to, grease gun the closest target, which can pretty much one-shot people in this 19 setting, even though it's not even fortified. So they have to look out for that. But we're probably still going to see mostly tank kiting around the entire time.
Yeah, we see Nerf having a bunch of necrotic stacks, but just running around, as you can see now. The good thing about the Peacekeepers is that they're really slow. So, and they also cast a lot, so they just stand still, cast a shield, do nothing. So it's pretty easy to kite the Peacekeepers and not really get hit by them. But there's a bunch of other mobs that need to be tanked, and then there's also a lot of interrupts that you need to do, which you also need the tank to help out with some of the interrupts. So the tank has to go in and out, make sure he has aggro, make sure he doesn't get too many necrotic stack, and definitely don't want to get hit by any of those Peacekeepers or thugs when they are enraging and they don't have a dispel from the rest of the coming out yet.
And kind of looking at the rest of this dungeon here, I'm so confused. I don't know what they're planning on doing with this Bloodlust. This has to be planned, right? Because they would have had to have noticed at some point, okay, our Bloodlust hasn't been used, what are we doing here? Motherlode historically has been one of those dungeons where it kind of borders on being able to use 3 Bloodlusts. As long as you use your first one immediately on cooldown, and then you use them pretty much immediately on cooldown after that. Maybe they're kind of opting to go for a scenario where they use their first Bloodlust later in the dungeon, like maybe a reaping into a boss or reaping into another huge trash pack, and then they just want to do something even more efficient with the second Bloodlust. We'll just have to see what they plan on doing with it going forward.
Maybe this is one thing we've seen out of Method EU once in a cup. And it was Fragments playing DK, and they had the Bloodlust saved all the way for the boss because they would pull some neutrals and some of the reaping on top of the boss to actually get the extra damage from the DK onto the boss, because in a tyrannical setting, the bosses take a long time, they have a lot of HP, and especially the first boss does get a damage increase on him. So if you get somehow, you get damage increase from other mobs being around it, like sub-rogues used to be in the past, DK is kind of like that. They do get single target damage increase if there's mobs around them. So by even buffing that even further by having Bloodlust and the damage increase on the boss, it's very efficient. So maybe that's something Method NA wants to do later on. We will see what to do.
Well, if there's any time for them to do it, it's going to be on this reaping wave here after they kill this trash pack. I believe actually if they kill one of the Peacekeepers here, that should get them just about to 60%, which should spawn that third reaping wave, and they'll be able to take that into the boss with Bloodlust. If they're planning on doing that, we'll still have to keep an eye on what they're doing with their Bloodlust, because they've had it off on cooldown for 5.5 minutes now. It's not a mistake at this point, right? On the side of Buffalo Nerf Rogue, they're trucking along too. Both of these teams are pretty even. They're on the same trash percentage just about, with Method NA maybe being just a slight bit ahead. But Buffalo Nerf Rogue is going to catch up once this Peacekeeper goes down. So Method NA is only very slightly ahead in this dungeon.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell who's ahead, even if the percentage. Even if one team is ahead in percentage, doesn't necessarily mean that they're ahead, because those Peacekeepers have a lot of HP, but they also give a lot of percentage. So they take a long time to kill, but if you're in a pool and you have a bunch of Peacekeepers still alive, and they're all on 20% HP, then that means within the next couple of seconds, you're going to get a lot of percentage. So doesn't necessarily mean that you're behind. Now, Method NA, they're on this Peacekeeper pool here, they're in 68%. So once this goes down, they're probably going to go up to 75, maybe even more percent here.
Yeah, I'm so confused by the strategy here. I don't really know what they're doing. We haven't really talked too much about the trash here, of course, but the thing is, this Raging Affix, the only real problem with the trash is going to be maybe when like one of the refreshment vendors gets below 30% and starts casting Ice Spritzer on someone. Each of those ticks of that Spritzer is going to do a ridiculous amount of damage. Of course, the thing is, you know, with a Resto Druid in your group, you are able to soothe off that Raging debuff, remove that double damage from the mob, so it's not really that dangerous anymore, and they can kind of pick and choose which target they want to do. And if I remember properly, it's a 15-second cooldown, something like that, pretty low cooldown. So they can kind of remove the really dangerous targets, but they're still kind of trucking through, and like we also always mentioned, they're just ever so slightly ahead of Buff or Nerf Rogue in terms of trash percentage.
Yeah, so they pulled the last trash in front of the boss here, so this might mean that they're actually choosing to do the 80% Reaping Wave with the boss and actually pop their Bloodlust, but at this point we're almost 8 minutes into the dungeon already, and 8 minutes is a lot of time without Bloodlust usage, without having this debuff on you. Just means that later on, either they just know that they're going to get a set amount of Bloodlust, and they're not going to get an extra one if they use it earlier. They definitely do have a plan, unless they completely forgot about it, which is really unlikely, because you would have noticed at this point, right? But Method NA, they do have the 80% Reaping Wave as soon as these Peacekeepers die, and then they're going to, okay, so there we go. They're going to pull a boss with the Reaping Wave, and it's gonna be Bloodlust too, right?
I was gonna say, like, maybe I would consider understanding the Bloodlust usage if they went past and pulled all of the extra trash into the boss with the Reaping Wave, so they got 2 Reaping Waves. But, I mean, this is maybe a little underwhelming in terms of usage of Bloodlust. It makes sense in the tyrannical setting. They might not want to use it for trash, and we saw JB kind of getting caught up on the corner there with that bomb. He wasn't able to punt it directly into the boss, but able to communicate with the teammates, punt it out to them, and then one of the teammates can punt it into the boss. That being, of course, the main mechanic of this fight. The boss will punt out 3 of those bombs, and if you knock those bombs into the boss, he gains a stacking damage taken increase. But that's the thing, right? That's why we saw the DK go into the boss there with the Bloodlust. Same thing we saw in Waycrest Manor. It just kind of funnels that AoE damage into single target damage.
Okay, so we can compare the boss damage a little bit between those two teams. Buff or Nerf Rogue not having the Bloodlust available, while Method NA had the Bloodlust. So I believe once the damage buff on the boss dropped, Method NA was a little bit very close to 60%, while Buff or Nerf Rogue is still on 71%. So the Bloodlust definitely paid off for Method NA here. So if Buff or Nerf Rogue does not get an extra usage of Bloodlust out of this dungeon, then it was definitely worth it for Method NA to save it. Now, one thing to note as well is when we talk to Method NA, they actually said that Motherlode is one of their best dungeons strategy-wise, and they feel very comfortable here. So this must be their strategy here.
Yeah, and honestly, I'd love for them to shut me up and be like, hey, we have a sub 20-minute time in this dungeon, we're going to show it to you. That's why we only use 2 Bloodlusts and save our Bloodlust for that long. That would make perfect sense at that point. I just don't think we've ever actually seen a sub 20-minute Motherlode. That's why it's so confusing at this point. But because of that Bloodlust usage, they are 20% ahead on the boss, plus a little bit of extra trash count, which is going to be maybe one or two extra trash mobs later on in the dungeon. Not too huge, but the boss percentage definitely huge in the tyrannical setting.
Yeah, so Method NA definitely pretty far ahead on boss percentage here. On Tyrannical especially, boss HP percentage means a lot because, of course, there's just so much more HP. Now, 15% trash left for Method NA. We will see if they want to backtrack and kill some more trash before, which I don't think. They're probably going to focus on the trash after this boss, and that's a pretty difficult trash to do, especially when you have Raging, because those mobs randomly throw damage on the tank unless he's not enraged, and it's on random members, and it does so much damage even without Raging. So we'll see how it goes for Method NA here.
Yeah, and of course they're probably gearing up to this big pull here. Like you mentioned, those Earth Shapers, they cast that Rock Lance, which is a single target interruptible spell on I believe it's supposed to be the threat target, but you know, if the tank goes down or drops threat, it's probably a one-shot on Raging to any of these characters. And we see Yoda instantly proccing his cheat death there. Just probably forgot to hit Tricks of the Trade. Sometimes it happens, you know, I've been playing Rogue for the past month. Sometimes you forget to hit it, even if it's off the GCD. But because they have that Unholy DK for the massive AoE damage, and it's not even Tyrannical, it's Tyrannical, not Fortified, they're able to just blast through the AoE pull. No problem.
Yeah.
Just no problem there.
Ching actually dropping really low for Buff War Nerf Rogue here, but he did manage to recover, did manage to get some heals up, and they're about to kill the boss too. But Method NA at this point, they're already done with the next trash. They only have 2% left, so there's 2% they can get from anywhere really. They can kill a rat after this next boss, or they can pull some of the trash here on top of the boss later on at the very end, and then Shadow Melt off the Reaping Wave. We will see what they do, but at this point there's really only 3 bosses left for Method NA. Well, Buff War Nerf Rogue still has to deal with this trash, as they used to have Bloodlust for it too, and Ching dropping so low.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of one of those dangerous pulls. I'm not sure about using the Bloodlust on the trash here, but they're definitely going for that same strategy that I was talking about earlier, making sure you're using your Bloodlust on cooldown so that you get 3 uses of it throughout the dungeon. It might not be the most efficient usage, but not inefficient usage versus, efficient usage when you're getting a full extra one is maybe a little bit better. Method NA is now on Azarok, which is probably the most dangerous boss in the dungeon in terms of mechanics. These 4 Earth Ragers that are spawned at the start of the fight will fixate random targets in the group, and if they manage to melee that target in the group, they apply a stacking physical bleed debuff, which can get pretty dangerous. Not to mention it's also necrotic, so if you get meleeed, you get that physical bleed plus the necrotic stacks, meaning you can't get healed for as much as you normally would be.
You definitely do not want to get hit by those Ragers at all. That's why we see them kited around the boss, basically. And you can stun them sometimes to make sure that you get some space, but you definitely don't want to walk out of melee range to kite them, because then you lose boss damage. So you want to make sure that you stack them up when you pull the boss somehow, either with CC or with moving properly, and then you just kind of want to make sure that the team moves together so all the Earth Ragers stack up, and you can still DPS the boss as efficiently as possible. And you can see all the damage dealers DPS. Of course, JB as well, just being in cat form here, trying to maximize the DPS, because on a tyrannical setting like in this Motherlode here, it's very important to do as much single target damage as possible, because the bosses just take so long and it's so difficult to get more efficiency at. As we see JB pull one of those Stone Furies here.
Yeah, he's probably planning to pull that last Stone Fury for the last 2% they'll need here, and we'll see them do the strategy that we've seen so many teams do in this dungeon here. You have a tiny bit of time, maybe about a second and a half, 1 GCD before reaping spawns where you're out of combat. So we'll see these teams all mount up. You're going to kill the boss, they're going to kill the trash mob, and they're going to be spamming their mount button. And once they're on their mounts, they're going to run down to the 3rd boss, where they'll shadow meld both all of the trash they pulled plus the reaping wave. Now, we have seen plenty of teams mess this up. It's definitely one of the more easy things to mess up, but they kind of have that backup safety. And if they do end up not being able to shadow meld it off, the Druid can die and Shakib can battle res him. We do see Lazarus going down on the side of buff or Nerf Rogue, but they do have a battle res for him.
Yeah, they are out of battle res at this point, though, and we see Tombo just drop so low with the necrotic stacks and all the other debuffs as he pops one of his cooldowns to stay alive. And at this point, they cannot have anyone die, because even though they do have 2 battle reses with the Rasta Druid and the DK, they just don't have any battle reses available to them. So no matter who dies, they're not going to be able to get them back up. But at this point, with the initial 4 Ragers going down, it really shouldn't be a big problem anymore, because there's only 1 Rager that spawns from this point onward, and that one can be kited very easily and dealt with really easily. So as long as you don't get hit by the frontal of Azarok, you should be fine.
JB with a little bit of style there, jumped up to the right side, and while charging down to the train tracks over who knows how many bombs, just kind of trying to show off the masterful practice that they've gone through. But it looks like they're doing perfectly here. They look like they've shadow melded everything off, and they have no reaping. Usually we see 1 or 2 resistance souls get through, but none for them. Perfectly done, perfect execution, shadow meld goods off. All they have left now is to kill Rixa and then move on to the final boss. Just boss to boss to boss here for Method NA.
Yeah, very well done by Method NA, and it's good to see that they recovered, because at the very start, if you guys remember, we had 1 death from Shakib going on, and then 1 death from Lighty as well at the very start of the dungeon. And we talked about how they can't have that, they need to keep a cool head, they need to play better. And after those 2 deaths, nothing happened to them. They played perfectly, had a clean run, and they are on Rixa right now. They also have 1 battle rest available, and with JB and Shakib having a rest, it really shouldn't be nothing really should happen to them. This boss on Tyrannical is kind of difficult, though, especially for tank damage, because it does so much magic damage, and prop warriors are used to be very tanky against physical, but not so much against magic damage.
Yeah, they have a little bit of that magic resistance in terms of spell reflect, but that's not too often. They can only do that, every now and then. Otherwise, it's just kind of the healer having to pump all the healing into the tank for all those magic debuffs. Now, fortunately, the DPS, on the other hand, have plenty of things to deal with that. They've got Touch of Karma, they've got, AMS, they've got Cloak of Shadows. They have so many things to make sure they're dealing with that debuff. So JB has to kind of, hot up the tank, and then he can just kind of sit there cat form, and as we see him right now, start, ripping and ricking the boss.
Here we see Buff Warrior and Rogue are also done with the boss here as they move on to killing some of those test subjects to get the 100%. Then they will move on to the boss and shadow meld off all the aggro from the rest of the mobs and the Reaping Souls. So let's see if they can do the skip properly as well, as we have seen from Method NA before. But Method NA at this point, they're already on 35% on Rixa on a tyrannical setting, which means they're quite... they are ahead a lot at this point, so it's definitely the Method NA's game here. If they don't make any mistakes, they're definitely going to win.
Yeah, and I think the thing about the Bloodlust timing is their timing is going to be good, right? Their Bloodlust is going to come up by about the time they probably get to the final boss. But the thing about the Bloodlust timing for buff or Nerf Rogue is it's also going to come up, I believe, for the second phase of the final boss. So I'm not really sure if it was the Bloodlust usage that was good for them. I think it was just overall their execution in the dungeon has been better. Namely, most specifically, that first pull after the first boss. They just kind of exploded the pack. It was no danger at all. They just kind of killed everything instantly. And Buff or Nerf Rogue definitely had some kiting going on for that pack, costing them a lot of time. So I don't know if it's I don't know. Bloodlust, probably not, but just strategy is better for sure.
Yeah, it seemed like Method NA dealt with this trash pull very easily without their Bloodlust, while Buffware and Nerf Rogue used their Bloodlust for that exact same pull, and they struggled a lot more. So very well done by Method NA, and just probably the reason why they feel so comfortable on this map and why they think this is one of their best maps, as they're doing really well. They use their shot here to get to the last boss, making sure they don't aggro anything. Now at this very end, there's one mob who has True Side. That's why we see one of them actually get aggro, but they can just shadow melt off the aggro, and then they only have the boss left to do as they're already in 100% trash.
Yeah, and we see one of the raid markers going down for one of the sort of safe spots on this boss on that grade over there. So this final boss, Mogul Res Duncan, we kind of talk about this a lot. These final two bosses, specifically Mogul, are just kind of these big area of denial bosses where there's a lot of mechanics that go out that force players to dodge. You can't be in a certain area, otherwise you take massive damage. So we saw the first missile barrage coming out. We see the micro gun coming out for the boss, forcing you to run in a circle. In addition to that, he'll also toss a rocket on the healer every now and then, which will do a massive amount of AoE damage if anyone's standing in it. We see that going out right now, actually. But pretty much all the players have to do is keep an eye on where they're standing, making sure they're not standing in any of those AoE abilities.
Yeah, there's definitely some combos that can happen for the healer specifically, because the healer is the one who needs to kite out the missile, and when you're away from the boss, everything becomes a lot more difficult to dodge, because the Gatling gun, of course, has a wider angle the further you're away from the boss, and then you also have the missiles from the boombots to dodge. So the healer definitely has the most difficult job when it comes to dodging mechanics here, because the melees can't really be targeted by the missile as long as there's a ranged target. But other than that, it really should be fine for them. They do have the Bloodlust for second phase, as you mentioned, and the boss will go into the second phase on 50%.
Yeah, and I think we'll have to see. The Bloodlust in the transition phase, I don't really like the transition phase Bloodlust, right? Those two mobs really aren't too dangerous. It's just a little bit of extra damage on the group. As long as JB is keeping an eye on healing and not trying to damage too much, they should be perfectly fine. I'd prefer to see it used for boss damage, because that second phase is, you know, in a time trial dungeon where you're speedrunning things, the single target is the least efficient part of the dungeon. So you want to make sure you're getting through the single target part as quickly as possible. That's why I want to see it on the single target. So and we'll see who's right. How about that? So you'll see where they use it here.
Yeah, so the transition phase, starting now, and this is actually very damage heavy for the healer, because in a tyrannical setting, whenever the boss goes down and kills those pillars, which you have to kill to remove the shield, it's actually a lot of AoE damage coming out. And then those mobs that you see, they also channel an ability on players that also does damage, so it can definitely be dangerous, but we see people not even dropping lower than 60% whenever the boss goes down. So it should be alright for JB to make sure they heal the players. And they also have defensives to use, of course. As you see JB going into bear form whenever the boss slams down to make sure to reduce the damage as much as possible.
Yeah, and like you were mentioning, the Bloodlust in this phase definitely would have been a huge safety call, but I'm liking what they're doing here for the speed aspect of this, right? You're not in this tournament, you're not in the MDL land because you're safe, you're here because you're a speedy team who likes speedrunning dungeons, so love to see the Bloodlust in the second phase for them. We do see Buff or Nerf Rogue has made it to the final boss. They are 30% behind on the boss, which is pretty impressive considering how far behind they were before, but you know, it would take a full team wipe from Method NA at this point for them to have to come back. And you know, JB even has the safety net of having Shaquem on DK to battle res him should he go down, so I don't really see Method NA losing this one at this point.
No, but if you think about it, Buff or Nerf Rogue, I mean, Method NA definitely was the clear favorite for this matchup here, and Buff or Nerf Rogue is not that far behind at all. And on a map that Method NA said, this is one of the best maps. So Buff or Nerf Rogue not that far behind at all, and there's definitely a chance they can win a game off of Method NA, especially if they make more mistakes like they did at the very start of this dungeon. But this game here, clean by Method NA, and very deserved victory as the Mogul Reston goes down and they have 100% trash already.
Yep, once this goes down, the little goblin will pop out at the end, and they'll just be home free. Mosul back going down, and Method NA taking map 1.
No surprise here to say Method NA coming out strong on the Motherlode as they take game 1 here in a very convincing fashion. I love being able to see those larger pulls. We talked about it before, a lot of kiting going down, a lot of times where the tank is going to be a threat, but they're just running around all over the place. As you mentioned, Sours, not too big of a deal.
Yeah, this dungeon it's a lot of trash, then a little bit of bosses. And Method NA was able to handle the trash as well as the bosses just that much faster than Buff War Nerf Rogue was. They had quite a significant gap in between them, but I feel like Buff War Nerf Rogue was able to kind of close some of it there at the very end of the dungeon, but that 2-minute difference between these two teams is a lot to overcome in the course of a Mythic Dungeon.
And of course, just how many times they had to burn through all of their battle reses, or so frequently they were just wasting a little bit of time having people die to some very simple things there. That I think is probably what most encapsulates the polish for a team there. And if you're not polished, if you're having just little deaths here and there and consistently having them as they did, it starts snowballing in favor of your opponent.
Yeah, these couple of random early deaths for Method NA were kind of bad. You see Lighty just getting slammed by that thug early in the dungeon. You know, that's the kind of danger of the raging in this dungeon. But after you deal with those thugs, raging doesn't really become a factor anymore. And so Method NA was able to kill this first boss here with about a minute ahead of Buff War Nerf Rogue. And then they've got another, like a full minute and a half by the time they kill Azrock, with some slight variations with how the two teams handle trash in between these two bosses due to how they were routing the first half of the dungeon. And then they were able to maintain this gap and even widen it a little bit all the way through Rix of Flame, and then that was just enough for Method NA to secure a nice, clean, and easy victory here in this dungeon. And I was worried that either of these teams could have had an issue with the skips to either of these bosses, where we have seen in the past, from these teams in particular even, failing to do the skips to get to those bosses, but there was no issues here in the LAN.
We've seen a number of times, regardless of the dungeon, if people just fail to pay attention for just one moment. I mean, we saw earlier at Taldazar, one of the most simple skips possible. People are failing on it. So great job by them on that run, Nagura. And anything else that you're kind of expecting to see out of Buff War, or was this really kind of the level of playing that you were expecting from them?
I was actually kind of impressed by them, to be honest, because they did manage to close the gap at the very end. They were not that far behind, in my opinion, especially because we were expecting Method NA to do well, and we were expecting them to win. So I do think Buff War and Nerf Rogue did show that they can definitely hold their own, and I think we're going to see some really good things from Freehold out of them.
I'm very excited to see Freehold, and I'm sure Method NA has got some good things cooked up for us. So we're going to hop over to a quick break before that happens. Don't go anywhere. The MDI will return right after this. Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International. Unfortunately, we had a DC in our LAN environment, which would trigger a remake, since that the priority is going to be on us to make sure they're ready for the players. So we are all set. Everyone is ready to go as we move on into Game 2 between Method NA and Buff War Nerf Rogue.
All right, let's do this again. Now, hopefully Buff War Nerf Rogue is not going to have that many deaths anymore, as they do the same pull again on this very first start here, while Method NA chose to use the strat. Of course, none of these teams are going to change up their strategies. They're going to do the exact same thing, but this time around, hopefully with less deaths.
And I mean, both of the teams definitely had something big happen to them that they didn't want to have happen, right? We were talking about it so many times in that dungeon. You know, Buff War Nerf Rogue had this kind of death run thing happen at the start, and, you know, Shakib happened to have that mishap in the middle of the dungeon. So both of these teams are going to be looking at both of those pressure points, making sure nothing happens there that happened in the last dungeon.
Yeah, and this time around, Buff War Nerf Rogue seems to be doing a lot better with the bursting stacks here, as they didn't roll them at the very end, so no refresh on the bursting at all. Well done by them. Well, Method NA also popped their Boralus, of course, to do this other pull without the mobs that the Buff War Nerf Rogue pulled at the very start. But both of those teams are going to reach 20% trash after their trash pulls are done, and then they're going to pull it on top of the first boss.
And I want to say it looks like Method NA did a little bit better job of their sort of like no-tossing strategy that they planned on using. Only the Enforcers are left, so they have to make sure they're not kiting through any of the Sanguine left by. But, you know, they're all like maybe 10% health, so pretty clean execution from them. And, you know, they're kind of at the same point in the dungeon they were in the first run through, where they're pulling the boss probably maybe 30 to 40 seconds ahead of Buff War Nerf Rogue.
Hey, we see Method NA, of course, engaging the first boss, while Buff War Nerf Rogue, I mean, I'm not sure, because let's look at their pulls, right? Both of the teams are getting that 20% trash, but Method NA is doing it in one pull, while Buff War Nerf Rogue needs to do 2 separate pulls. So this is why they're slower here to start, and even though they didn't have any deaths this time around, they're still slower. So strategy-wise, Method NA just does have a better pull at the start here. So Method NA, they're on the first boss here. Captain Crack is on 66%, so they're definitely ahead at this point, as I mentioned before. But it's a tyrannical setting, so bosses do have a lot of HP, and bosses are going to take a long time. Wait, isn't it a fortified setting, as I mentioned before?
I don't think... Yeah, it actually is. I believe it is it's a fortified
right?
setting. I
Yeah,
think we have the wrong graphic
okay.
on there. That's fine. We see it at the top there. Fortified bursting sanguine
Yeah,
reaping.
yeah,
That's
there we
perfect
go.
at the top. Sometimes it's a little messed up. There we go. Hey, we're good. Perfect. Nice. They are 30% ahead on the boss still, which is pretty important, even in a fortified setting, right? You don't want to be 30% behind on a boss. That's a pretty massive amount of HP. And I mean, really, we're still so far ahead in the dungeon. The thing is, looking forward to Method NA, we have to make sure that they actually are able to not have that mistake happen in the middle of the dungeon specifically.
Yeah, so Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue, again, they're 2% ahead, as you mentioned before. So because their pools were a little bit different here at the start, they are slightly ahead in trash, but it's not going to be making up for this 20 to 30% they're behind on the boss. Now, thankfully, both of those teams are playing cleaner this time around without any deaths so far. But again, on a fortified setting, this boss not as difficult at all. So as long as you don't get double, triple hits on, as you see, Yoda actually dropping very low. So I guess I kind of jinxed it. As I said, this is an easy fight, and Yoda just almost goes down with one of those shots here as he drops low. But he did not proc his cheat death, so he still has one cheat death available to him. As they down the Sky Captain Crack here, they're going to move on to the next trash. They are going to skip this Enforcer, as we've seen before. Now, again, if they skip the Enforcer, like they did the last time around, and we have a death without a Battle Rest come in, then Shakib can't really come back easily unless he has to Shadow Mouth or an invisible potion available to them. So hopefully we don't have the same thing happening again to Shakib.
And there we see the Shadow Modes go off at probably like 3:55-ish, so sorry, 3:35-ish. So they'll have that back 2 minutes later as well. So the thing is, Method NA killed the boss, about 15 seconds slower. I believe they killed it at 3 minutes exactly in the previous dungeon. So it's a combination of two things at this point in the dungeon. Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue didn't have their death run thing happen where they had several deaths and had to run back and finish off the rest of the trash. And Method NA is just going a little bit slower too. So the thing is, moving on, Method NA's execution should be better still. They're still ahead. They still have the better strategy as long as they're able to pull it off. That's really all it comes down to at this point.
We actually saw JB just running against a pillar there for a while with his speed potion up, but he did manage to trigger the event, and then he's going to come back. Now this time around they're actually doing a little bit worse without JB, as they drop very low here from this trash pool, but JB is back at this point, so he should be able to recover, should be able to heal them all back up. Now this next pool is the pool that caused trouble for Method NA, so this time around maybe they want to wait a little bit for JB to catch up on the heals, because again, Restorer is one of those healers who needs to prepare for healing. So if he goes and triggers the event, and when he comes back everyone is low HP and they're already pulling another pack, then it's going to be hard for the healer to catch up and to heal everyone back up. But this time around they waited a little bit when JB came back, made sure he pre-hots everybody, make sure everyone is full HP, and then they did this next pull. So this time around they should be safer here.
A good job from Shakib there. He waited for 3 Sunders like every DPS should do. Must be all that classic WoW he's been playing lately. Good for him. They're able to deal with the AoE DPS here, no problem with the Unholy DK. You can see how much damage they were missing out on last time just by not having that Unholy DK there, and just how much cleaner the pull was able to be with that extra DPS to kind of, trim everything down to the same HP. So without that mess up, without that hiccup, we've seen the rest of their strategy for the entire dungeon. They should be ahead. All they got to do is execute.
Definitely. Buff Warrior Rogue did struggle a little bit with their bursting here on this pool, but they did manage to recover. They only have to finish up these last few mobs, but as you said, Method NA just ahead 40%. They proc their reaping. They are pulling the boss here, while Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue still needs to proc their reaping wave and do the boss. So Method NA definitely ahead here, and it's good to see that they are playing cleaner, and they keep a cool head while having these mistakes in the very first dungeon and having their remake, even though they were ahead, right? Method NA was ahead when this whole the issues started for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue. So it's good on them to be able to recover, making sure they have a clean run, and just perfect run so far by Method NA.
I mean, the funny thing is about this scenario, right, is because they don't know where the other team was, they probably were thinking, wow, thank God we got a remake. We made a huge mistake in that dungeon. So, I don't know if it's going to be too much of a mental thing, but they definitely know that they made mistakes and they wanted to be cleaner this time around, which they have been. And they also made the added change of pulling the reaping into the boss this time around, which they didn't do last time. So that's just going to be, extra time on the board for them. In the last dungeon that we had, Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue killed the boss when Method NA still had the boss, 40-50%. If Method NA is able to get the boss down earlier, they're going to be probably a minute or two ahead in this dungeon.
Yeah, and here you can finally see just how much time mistakes like those cost you, right? Sometimes when you play a dungeon and you're plugging and you have one death, you feel like, whatever, it's one death. It's not going to cost us that much time. But here, of course, when every single second counts, and you see just how much faster they are this time around when they don't have Shakib dying, and we see Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue actually losing one of their rogues, and they do not have a Battle Rest available. This means that they're just going to have to foreman the rest of this fight, which should should be possible, but you see everyone dropping very low from all the trash that they pulled on top of the Reaping Wave as well.
Yeah, at this point, when you only have 4 people alive, the danger of those tormented souls that cast those grave bolts goes up exponentially. Every single one of those grave bolts is 25% of your max HP, and usually it's okay because those are kind of spread out amongst a group of 5 people, but every time your group size goes down, the chances of those grave bolts all going on the same person goes up exponentially, so definitely really dangerous for them now. They are able to get the Reaping down, but like you mentioned, now they have to deal with the rest of the boss, 1 player down.
Yeah, and one thing to note here, bursting is one of those affixes that, of course, gets applied when you're out of combat, right? Because the mobs die, you're out of combat, but you still have the bursting. And one thing to note here is that you can actually heal the bursting away by sitting down and eating a fish feast, and you can also get the mana back. But every time the bursting ticks, it actually interrupts your eating. So we saw JB just spam clicking his fish feast, making sure he gets the mana back, which is something that definitely is important to know because, for example, when you trigger Reaping, and Reaping brings you into combat, and your healer is very low on mana, and then the bursting interrupts your eating, then that can be very dangerous, and that might be a reason why Loda was so low on mana the last time around when they engaged the boss. So you want to make sure that your healer is sitting down eating it, the bursting is away before you engage something if he's low on mana.
And we definitely saw a little bit of a safer thing coming out from Method NA there. JB didn't go down to deal with the pig while they were dealing with the trash pack. He just decided to go ahead and stick with the group and deal with the pig later. But we're probably going to see something similar from them, right? These teams kind of have their routes figured out, pre-planned in advance. Reaping Waves they've got figured out. They're going to Reaping Wave into Tortolan here. They're going to Reaping Wave into the boss with Bloodlust. It's all planned out in advance. They're probably not going to make too many major changes to their strategy. It's all about the execution. As long as they don't have any stupid deaths, they should be fine. But they do have that added, safety cushion of having a battle res available, and they'll also have yet another battle res available in about 1:15 here.
Yeah, Buff War Nerf broke on 45% trash, so they're one whole Reaping Wave behind pretty much, but they're about to finish up this trash pack. But Method NA just doing so much better this time around. They are in Ludwig, they had their 60% Reaping Wave. Buff War Nerf broke just now finishing off the trash pack, moving on, using your Shroud to get into the Ring of Booty. But Buff War Nerf broke also had a death here on the Monk going out on this trash pack. They had to use their last battle rest. Now they are going to have another battle rest available soon within a couple of seconds, but still just having deaths still here and there, just costing them time. 15 seconds now on the board compared to 0 deaths on Method NA. Just it seems like Buff War Nerf broke still just did not really improve that much compared to the last time around, and it shows. Method NA just far ahead at this point.
Yeah, and it's like we were talking about so many times, near the end of that last dungeon, as we see once again, Buff War Nerf Rogue, just another bursting thing with the team going down. They will be able to release and kind of run back quickly, but it's going to be a full team wipe for them. They have that Council Captain's respawn point, but at this point, another full team wipe plus, they have to repull all the trash they already pulled. They're out of this dungeon as long as Method NA plays clean. So it's like we were talking about earlier. Method NA's just strategy and execution has just been so much better throughout these entire dungeons.
Yeah, this was a very bad mistake by Buff War Nerf Rogue just because of bursting, right? Just the damage dealer is not controlling the damage really well. And if you think about it, that's what I was worried for Method NA, because they're the ones who play the DK. Buff War Nerf Rogue switched to the Rogue to not have this DK burst AoE, to not have the bursting stack really high. That's probably the main reason why they're not playing the DK. Because, of course, we talked about it before. Bursting is just the damage dealer's job to make sure it doesn't get refreshed the very last second, to make sure it doesn't stack super high. And Method NA does have this DK with the burst AoE damage, so they should be the ones who get it really high and who get it rolling at the very last second. But Buff War Nerf Rogue are the ones who are dying to the bursting, who are not controlling the damage really well. And they have this setup with the double Rogue with the monks who can control their damage. So definitely a not very good bursting play, and play from the DPS coming out from Buff War Nerf Rogue. Method NA just doing a much better job.
And I mean, that's definitely just a huge DPS brain thing, right? Like,
yeah.
You can control your damage as a rogue, but when was the last time you saw a rogue click off Blade Flurry? It never happened. I'm guaranteeing you it probably never happened in this tournament, too. I'd be really surprised if it happened, actually, to be honest with you. But we're seeing similar strats, right? We're seeing, 4th Reaping Wave, 80% Reaping Wave, plus Bloodlust, and a Trothak. Even though it's, a fortified setting, it's just such a huge damage increase on this single target boss for the Unholy DK. Not to mention, it's also a little bit of a damage increase for the Rogue, too. So, I mean, we're pretty much seeing what Method NA is capable of here. And, I want to call back once again to the 40K comparison. I believe their Freehold time was just below 18 minutes. So, we're going to see, we're probably going to see that 40K Method NA matchup later today. Just be a little bit of a preview of those two teams, competing head-to-head.
Yeah, so, I mean, at this point, we've seen Method and A do 2 dungeons. I mean, we've seen them do this dungeon twice, but they had some small mistakes both in Motherlode and the first time they did this Freehold. But maybe this is just what they need for the warm-up, right? Because this is the second time they do a Freehold, and they're doing so much better, so much cleaner. And let's be honest, when we talk about strategies, Method and A did have better strategies in both the dungeons, of course. So Method and A doing a really good job as long as they keep their head, like if they keep a cool head, and as long as they don't make these small mistakes, as we've seen them do, then they're definitely going to be the favorites here. We see them do so well, of course, in the caps as well, as they're the number 2 seed from the Western region, only Method U having more points than them. And they really need to perform, and they are at this point, as they're already downing Trothek here, while Backbone Nerf Rogue is still dealing with some of the trash, didn't even engage Trothek yet.
Yeah, they're definitely just massively ahead here. It's, they're kind of just, competing against themselves. This is a time trial at this point. They're just trying to go as fast as they possibly can without any mistakes. And honestly, we should keep talking about those kind of nervy deaths that they have, because that's what I think I'm going to chalk it up to. Honestly, those are just stage nerves, right? When I was playing in the MDI last year as a player, I got to practice on stage because that was the first match of the day, and I have to say, being able to play on stage, being able to practice at the computers on stage, it definitely helps calm the nerves a little bit. So I'm not really surprised in their 3rd dungeon around that they're just playing clean. They're probably just getting comfortable.
Yeah, most definitely. It's also like a different setup. You have a different environment, different lights, so it's definitely, it needs some time to get used to, and it does feel like Method and A did get used to it now, as they have this clean run here, this clean Freehold, and we again see the Shroud coming out from them as they will engage the last boss. And we haven't seen more from them last time around because we had the disease issue happening for Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue at this time, but they are going to engage the boss here, and they're most likely also going to deal with the last 20% of trash that they need while fighting the last boss, Harley Swede. Now, one thing to note again, that they don't have their Bloodlust available as they used it for Trothak, so this can be dangerous for them as they fight trash plus the boss at the same time. And one thing to be very careful about is the Sanguine, of course, because you do not want to heal the boss at all.
This is a really weird sort of extra thing that they've done here. They've pulled this trash very early on into the boss, which means they're going to have some Sanguine on the ground when they kill it with their sort of bombardment ability here. They're just kind of cutting off part of the dungeon. Now, it makes sense if they're going to instantly pull the boss into the big pack in the middle right after this and deal with that with the bombardment as well. But they probably want to wait until they do that at 70% when the boss starts targeting everyone in the group with all the abilities. Actually, sorry, 60% is when that happens. So, because they'll have so many more bombardments to hit the trash pack with.
Yeah, one more thing to note as well is, though, maybe they're choosing to do the trash a little bit more staggered because of the bursting, because at 50%, not only does the boss do more damage with the bombardments through the trash, but also more damage to the group, because everyone is just going to get the bombardment, which does damage. Even if you don't get hit by the explosion itself, you also get AoE damage. So maybe on top of having bursting on everybody and having the AoE damage, maybe they just choose to stagger it a little bit more, have some more trash at the start, and then pull some more trash in later, as they only need 10% more at this point, because bursting is a very difficult act, as we've seen Backwarner Rogue just struggled to it and had a full team wipe because of it.
Yeah, and of course we did just see Harlan Sweet pop over from Phase 1 into Phase 2 at 60%. Instead of only targeting one player with each of the abilities, he now targets everyone with all of his abilities, minus the tank, of course. The tank just gets meleeed in the face. So we see the bombardments go on all of the players, meaning there's 4 bombardments going out instead of 1, and that's what we saw 40k use earlier to deal with several trash packs, and we're probably going to see Method and A do something similar at the end of this boss fight just to deal with that last 10% trash percentage they need to get rid of.
Yeah, so the last 10% should not be a problem. It's the last thing they can really wipe to anymore at this point. But we see even JB just being in melee, just going in cat form, doing as much damage as possible, making sure, again, that they're as fast as possible. Now, I want to mention again that the teams do not know how far ahead or behind they are at this point. So Method and A, of course, have a good feeling because they have 0 deaths. So they should know that they're ahead. But you never know. Maybe Buff Warrior Nerf Rogue also has 0 deaths, or maybe they have a better strategy and they're just faster. So the nerfs just are there until the very end because they just don't know. Are we ahead? Are we behind? But Method and A just doing a really good job just dealing with Harlan Speed at this point, and then they have to do the last 7%, which we're probably going to see at the side here with the Ravagers.
Yeah, the Ravagers are definitely going to be the last of the trash percentage here. They're just going to pull both of these trash packs. And yeah, they're just going to clear off the rest of their AO damage, let the Ravagers deal with the trash for them, and that's going to be a pretty impressive time from Method and A, just about a full minute faster than 40k's time, giving a little preview to the next series later today, as long as they're clean here with this trash pull. The Ravager does have to actually cast its ability for them to be able to get that off. But yeah, very clean dungeon from Method and A. No wipes in their second time around.
Yeah, very well done by Method NA as they finish up this last trash, or the painful motivation finishes off for them as they win with 0 deaths. So well done by Method NA here.
Performance even after the remake, doing better than they did previously and taking the series 2-0 there. Very good job by Method NA, and as we've seen previously, you know, want to be able to look at how teams are growing or how teams are changing or anything like that. Method NA on this one, Sours, coming out in force and taking that series about as we expected.
Yeah, I'm very impressed with how much they were able to clean up their play their second time around here in Freehold, where they didn't have any of the same mistakes that they made in the first time, but unfortunately for Buff War Nerf Rogue, they ended up making new mistakes that ended up costing them even more time than their mistakes their first go-around in Freehold cost them. Now, I know that Buff War Nerf Rogue said that their goal this tournament is to beat Dr. J, so we're going to be waiting to see if that's going to even be possible for them.
Yeah, they're going to have to work a little bit harder to be able to get to that point to be able to face off against Jay. And Zyro mentioned it before, they were actually able to pull off that jump, or the dodging the jump, I should be able to say, from any of those enforcers early on.
Yeah, so this unfortunate dungeon here, this death by Ching for Buff War Nerf Rogue, of course Ching PV, a lot of people don't know is that that's actually his girlfriend's name over back in Taiwan. So that's something that we learned about these teams when we were interviewing them the other day. So this death from him at the beginning of this fight was really bad, and then they don't have a battle res for when Tomboy goes down just a little bit later. And when you don't have a battle res on a boss, and the boss is at like 80% health, you know, you're just in such a bad spot. And then they had a really awful time dealing with bursting stacks a little bit later in the dungeon, the trash right before Trothak. And these huge wipes ended up costing Buff War Nerf Rogue way too much time that they simply could not afford to have. Whereas Method NA were able to clean up their play in this dungeon, perfectly executing a 0-death run, which is exactly what we hope to see out of them.
Yeah, even with pulling the officer a little bit, I mean, I know we were kind of looking at that a little bit, kind of scratching our heads on that one, Nagura, and saying, were they meaning to be able to pull that officer? But didn't matter either way, as they were able to clean it up very easily and be able to take it down quickly.
Yeah, so I think the whole strategy from Method NA just very well done in this Freehold, and also just having the confidence to play the DK with the bursting affix. We've seen other teams play a DK dungeon without a DK just because of bursting, because they have this uncontrollable, like this huge burst AoE damage, and if you stack your bursting really high because of it, then you're just gonna die. So especially because your healer does not have an immunity or any big cooldowns to deal with a lot of high bursting stacks as a Resto Druid. So very well done, but I'm very controlled damage, and I'm just very impressed by the strategy in general.
Yeah, poor Resto Druids, they just have such a tough time being able to heal.
I know, right?
You know?
Buff Resto Druids.
Now let's take it over to Thist as she gets to talk to JB after their win.
Thanks, Jack. Now, you built this team yourself. What player attributes were you looking for when you were building this team?
Just ballers, just guys. No, you know, you want guys that are committed. I mean, it's kind of a meme, but you know, one of the things you're looking for in a guy is somebody who plays WoW a lot. Probably doesn't have a job. Probably someone that can afford to just hang out at home, play a ton of World of Warcraft, which these guys can. We slam this stuff nonstop, whether it's for the MDI or just doing live stuff. You know, this is just, we love it. You don't have to drag anybody into practice. It's guys that are online waiting. You know, 5 minutes. You know, I said, hey, let's start practice at 10 a.m. I look on. You know, they've been there since 9:30. Like, what's up, dude? Where you been? Like, let's get going. So, yeah, just guys that are hungry for it and want to be there and want to do stuff.
Absolutely. And so one of your newest players, Yoda, was actually Heroes of the Storm player. Does he bring anything different to the table as somebody with that kind of history?
Well, I mean, that was, you know, one of the reasons why Yoda was one of the selections for the team was, you know, that factored into it. There are a few guys that I had in mind for that last spot, and one of the big tiebreakers was, you know, I knew Yoda had that experience in other games, and if you've played at a tournament before, obviously there's going to be a few differences there, but there's going to be a lot of things that, you know, you've at least shown the dedication to make a tournament. In another game, you've shown the skill level to make a tournament, and that's, you know, that's an impressive resume. That's something that sets you apart from other people in the World of Warcraft community. So yeah, you know, that when I knew that he had that kind of background, it was like, you know, you feel a lot safer picking a guy like that for your team.
Absolutely, that makes total sense. So finally, 40K is your next opponent as you play for their trip to the upper final. How important is it to you to avoid the lower bracket with the trip to BlizzCon on the line for the top 2 finishers in this tournament?
Well, you know, we've kind of lived in a lower bracket through our MDI career this season. That's been kind of our home. I'd maybe like to, maybe switch it up a little bit here. Maybe
Oh, really?
try out the upper bracket. I've heard it's nice. So we would maybe like to stay in the upper bracket. And definitely from a scheduling perspective, if you can stay in the upper bracket, you just got the 1 game Saturday, you got the 1 game Sunday. So certainly it's something that if just for creature comforts, it's nice to just know that you only got to come in 1 time and play. And, that Sunday's not looking great if, you got to come in, play back-to-back. And for the people that, might be trying to make the full lower bracket, potentially 3 back-to-back-to-back games. So, yeah, we'd like to stay upper bracket as long as possible.
Hey, I respect that so much. Thank you for chatting with me. And back to the desk.
From creature comforts to matchmaking, thank you so much for that one, Thist and JB. So we're taking a look at how their team was formed. Overall, it feels very good for them, and especially as they're trying to make sure they stay in that upper bracket. As we take a look at it right now,